Absolutely. So we have three initiatives, and I think the three initiatives speak to the fact that everybody is on a different part of their own personal learning journey. We're not assuming that everybody is fully woke, but what we've done is we've basically said that there's going to be a task force that's going to be focused on looking at talent, and specifically the talent acquisition pipeline, as it were, which I think is much more akin to maybe a talent acquisition cycle when we start talking about role models and fellowships and things like that. And so that group is actually focusing on working with specific schools, so actually working with high schools, pre-university, and looking at providing outreach programs, and specifically talking about, what is branding, and ultimately, is this a thing that you'd be interested in? Because I don't think that any 5-year-old wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go into branding. The second task force is focused on Black-owned businesses. So specifically looking at, businesses that were, hurt by COVID, and trying to apply, our, services, strategic and creative services to help them. And the last is pro bono. And I think this is actually one of my most exciting projects last year. We got to partner with Dean Dory Tunstall, who's at OCADU, who is one of the foremost voices of decolonization in design. And we worked with her on an initiative called It's My Future Toronto, which was kind of surveying, kind of 100 BIPOC youth in terms of what their city will become. But I think the ultimate thing is that we provided a job code, because I think ultimately this is where the rubber meets the road, and where everyone wants to do something, but ultimately, how are you enabled to do that during your kind of 9 to 5? And so by being able to bill time to a BLM job code, somebody can address a Black-owned business, a pro bono opportunity, or something related to talent. And so that's how we're at least trying to instrument that. And so I think that's been important. And we've seen a lot of awakenings happening internally. Of course, no one is fully there yet. But I do think that's been, I think, an interesting step in terms of how do you instrument this type of activity and initiative into, the billability aspect of the bottom line.
What Stephanie said earlier, there's a lot of good intention, and we're seeing that across, I would say, most organizations now. But I think the point is getting into action. And I think a lot of the issues can lie in retention. So we can get a lot of people into the funnel now that everybody is, like you said, Forrest, woke and amenable to this and trying to take action, but it can be really difficult when you stick out in every way and you palpably feel like you don't fit in. So I think as agencies, we need to create environments that people want to stay in. And I think that means that we need to do things. I'm a big fan of measures and metrics too, Forrest. So I think we need to get feedback very, very regularly. And I suggest that we do that by a third party, because what I've seen is people often don't tell the truth, no matter how much you talk about no retaliation policies, and don't take offense. We just do it. We should just get that feedback regularly, so that we can make change. If we don't know about things, we can't make the change, and make sure we're creating cultures and environments that are inclusive. And obviously there are just such a combination of elements that mean that people don't stay in businesses. But microaggressions are one that we all know about. And I think there are ones that are obvious and there are ones that are less so, but unconscious bias lies everywhere. And it's an important thing for people to realize. I mean, from personal experience, there are obvious things like when people ask me what my real name is, this is my real name. Or when I lived in America, how can you be Indian? I'm not. And have a British accent and a Russian name. I got that one all the time. And then there are less obvious ones. And maybe these are the most insidious ones. I mean, people often make assumptions. Forrest, you talked about this in terms of careers and being of Asian descent. My parents are quite unusual Asians, and the norm is not my personal experience. And my Asian parents were very supportive of me doing design. And although this isn't a big deal or ostensibly offensive, like Stephanie said earlier, it gets a bit tiring having to explain that no, we're not all the same.
How we actually make systemic change. And I know that, Stephanie, you're on one of the councils at REBA, which, if people don't know, REBA is it's the Royal Institute of, I can't remember what the acronym is actually.
British Architecture.
British Architecture, that's it. So you're actually, it's fantastic that you're actually up there hoping to change policy and make changes at that sort of level. Are you finding that that's working, or are there still challenges?
I did join, to really look at addressing some of these issues in terms of making the profession more inclusive. How can a big institution actually start to, represent the society that it's actually building for and designing for? What's interesting is, I guess, it's those barriers. I guess, similar to what Forrest said about, how do you wake up in the morning as a 5-year-old and decide you want to be an architect without knowing it's even a possibility? So I was working with the RIBA to actually work as an architecture ambassador, to have different people, different architects go into schools from different backgrounds to talk to them about what architecture is, what they need to do, what is their pathway to get there. Because a lot of the time, if you end up going to, for example, the wrong university or studying the wrong subject, you don't know that you're excluding yourself. And there is a lot of, for example, particularly in architecture, people are always given the wrong advice. You need to do physics, you need to be great at maths, you need to like the cold. These are the things I was told. I was told numerously that I couldn't be an architect because, I was creative. And actually I did want to do art initially. And my mum was like, what are you thinking? From her Caribbean background, similar to the conversations we were having. But I also had a supported family that actually enabled me to go down a path. But in terms of working with the RIBA, we spoke about different also entries to the profession. At the moment, it's a 7-year course. And if you don't necessarily have the money to pay for student loans or, for example, actually starting to rack up that student loan over 7 years with a potential limited return, how can we start to look at different pathways? So we're working together with the RIBA about, how can we start to look at different entries? So, for example, working with apprenticeships so that you can actually study and work at the same time. But actually, what's really important is particularly in the industry of the built environment, is that support. Is that support whilst you're in practice, the support to actually qualify as an architect. A lot of women don't qualify as architects, for example, because it generally takes longer than 7 years. So it's about almost addressing each of these barriers in a structural way. And of course, it is a massive institution, so nothing has happened overnight, but it's about chipping away and continuing that, change needs to happen, and it needs to happen from, from the structure, both grassroots and top down.